a bad check received by the proprietor of the motel. So this is all new information, because for a long time, this has not been actually ever really reported. I did all my research looking back into books. Nobody ever tells this part of the story. Now, this is the version of the New York Crime Commission, and this sheds a little bit more light as to how this all came about. So somebody passes a bad check which is received by the owner of the motel. Now, why would they call the state police? Because that wouldn't be something you would do. That's why, when we look back at this information to me seems like bullshit. And it seems to me like this is the guise that the state police and the crime commission were going to use to investigate people. Some of you may think that that's a reach, but I don't think it is, because they would need a reason. They would need a certifiable, viable reason. If they were going to try to prosecute people, they needed sort of a reason to be suspicious to begin with. The sergeant observed Joe Barbara Jr. of Apalachin, a suburb of Binghamton, in conversation with Mrs. Helen Schroeder, wife of the proprietor of the motel. After the departure of Mr. Barbara Jr., Miss Schroeder informed the state trooper that he had reserved 3 rooms for November 13th and 14th and instructed her to charge the room rent to the Canada Dry Bottling Company of Endicott, New York, which Joseph Barbara Sr. was president and owner. Mrs. Schroeder had asked Barbara to register for the guests, but he said he did not know what men were coming and that they were having a convention of Canada Dry Services. Later in the evening, Sergeant Croswell and Trooper Vasico drove up to the home of Joe Barbara Sr. in Apalachin, New York. They observed the following automobiles, in ownership of which were later identified by then through teletype messages. Now, first of all, if you receive a report of a bad check and you go and you see that, what leads you to the house of somebody? What good reason? Because it was taken care of. It was done and over with right there. The bill was taken care of. Put it on the Canada Dry account. Not a big deal. Why do they drive to Joe Barbara's house? There's no justifiable reason for them to do that. It was taken care of. So, number 1, a Lincoln automobile with license plate 62JL owned by James LaDuca. A Pontiac automobile with license plate 2WI645 owned by Patsy Turrigiano. A Cadillac automobile with New Jersey license plate HR4821 owned by Alfred Angelicola. The troopers thereupon communicated with agents Rustin and Brown from the alcohol and tobacco unit of the Treasury Department stationed in Binghamton, New York. Why would they do that? What reason would they have to do that? That's why I think this is leading to something else. Later in the evening, they revisited the Parkway Motel where they observed a Cadillac automobile bearing the license plate number of HM373, which they identified as the property of Buckeye Cigarette Service Company Incorporated out of Cleveland, Ohio, owned by John Scalish. Sergeant Croswell and Trooper Vasico asked Warren Schroeder, who was the owner of the Parkway Motel, to have his guests in one of the rooms reserved by Barbara to sign registration cards. However, Mr. Schroeder was told by one of the guests that Joe Barbara Sr. would take care of it the next morning and that they would they would not sign any registration cards. The troopers left the motel but returned shortly after 12:30 in the morning, in which they observed the Lincoln automobile owned by James LaDuca, which they had seen parked the previous night at the residence of Joe Barbara Sr. The troopers remained at the motel till almost 3 o'clock in the morning. They did not observe anyone arrive or occupy the rooms previously reserved. So they're staking it out. Why would they be staking out anything over something stupid like this? At about noon on November 14th, Sergeant Croswell and Trooper Vasico returned to the Parkway Motel with an agent from the alcohol and tax unit of the Treasury Department and observed the Cadillac automobile with Ohio license number HM373 was actually still there. but that the Lincoln automobile registered to the name of Mr. LaDuca was gone. 6 guests who had occupied the 3 rooms reserved by Joe Barber Jr. had departed. The troopers drove to the place of business of Barbara Sr. in Endicott, which was the Canada Dry Bottling Company, and noting zero activity, continued on to his home. This residence is located in the isolated area near a dead-end road on a hilltop southeast of Apalachin. There were 2 entrance drives. The main drive leads to a large parking lot and a 4-car garage to the rear of the main home. The other drive leads south of the main house to the tenant houses and a barn. As the troopers and the government agent approached the garage, they observed 6 to 8 cars parked in the space in front. While recording the license numbers of these automobiles, 10 or 12 men appeared from the rear of the garage, followed by others coming from the direction of the driveway and back of the garage. How can you see from the back of the garage when you're in front of the house? Additional automobiles parked in the front of the garage were also observed. At this point, Sergeant Croswell, hold on, I can't even read this fucking word. Okay, Sergeant Croswell from his automobile basically got on his CB for Sergeant Kennedy at the Vestal Station of the New York State Troopers Unit to meet him at the Apalachin location. So they're calling in reinforcements. He also communicated with Inspector Robert E. Denman at Sydney headquarters of the New York State Police and advised him of the situation. Well, what situation do you have? You just have cars with weird license plates. That's, once again, while I'm telling you something else was up here. A roadblock was then set up at the only exit leading from the Barber residence, and assistance from all uniformed officers in the area was requested. For what? For what fucking purpose? As reinforcements arrived, the roads and woods in the vicinity of the Barber house were combed, and a number of guests had sought to evade the roadblock by proceeding across the countryside on foot were rounded up. In addition to the physical search of the participants at the meeting, all vehicles were searched. Neither weapons nor incriminating evidence was found by the state police. Prior to releasing the participants, the New York State Police determined that these men were neither wanted by the police or wanted in the jurisdiction which they resided. So in other words, there's no warrants on anybody, which there's no justifiable cause for any of this. As a result of the roadblock and search of the area made by the troopers, it was established that the individuals listed in Appendix A, hereto annexed, were present at the residence of Joe Barber Sr. on November 14th at the time of the arrival of Sergeant Croswell. During the roundup and questioning, discussions were between Sergeant Croswell and his superiors as to whether any section of the penal code was violated by the participants, either collectively or individually. In the opinion of the state police that were present, there was insufficient legal basis upon which to detain any participant after interrogations were terminated. Each of the participants at this meeting, upon being asked for the purpose of the visit, stated that they had come to visit Joe Barber Sr. because he had been sick. Despite the inference that the meeting was for an unlawful purpose, I agree with the conclusion of the state police officials that there was insufficient grounds upon which to detain and charge anyone who had visited the property. This is where it gets weird. Penal Law Section 722, Subdivision 2, provides that any person with intent to provoke a breach of peace or whereby a breach of the peace may be occasioned, who is engaged in some illegal occupation or who bears an evil reputation and with an unlawful purpose consorts with thieves and criminals, is guilty of the offense of disorderly conduct. Under Subdivision 12, the fact that the defendant is engaged in an illegal occupation or bears evil reputation and is found consorting with persons of like evil reputations, thieves, or criminals, in prima facie evidence such consorting was for unlawful purposes. While it might have been possible to prove that Appalachian guests were pure evil and had pure evil reputations, there is complete absence of competent proof beyond a reasonable doubt that there were presently living as thieves or criminals. If such proofs were in the hands of authorities, the individuals concerned would have long since been convicted of the form of thievery or other crimes to which such proof related. So in other words, they got nothing. The Court of Appeals in this state stated bluntly, the legislators do not say that one who has been convicted of a crime is therefore to be considered a criminal, or that consorting with such is an actual criminal offense. The person must be presently living as thieves or criminals. Such is the wording. Such must be in the meaning. People versus Pieri, 269, New York, 315, 325. It is possible that some of the guests escaped the roundup. Had Sergeant Croswell been able to appraise the situation a day earlier and detain the men at the Parkway Motel, or had troopers been available at the start of the roundup, additional participants might be possibly have been bagged. So the fact that they say this, and this is what should stick out to you, or had more troopers been available at the start of the roundup. So in other words, they had already tried to do this a day prior. So that tells me that they had information about something. But even after the most successful battle, armchair strategists can easily devise moves which might have been made for a still more decisive victory. In my opinion, Sergeant Croswell and the state police acted vigorously and deserve high commendation. But for what? All right, so action of the Commissioner of the Investigation in the State of New York. On November 15th of 1957, Your Excellency directed me to conduct an investigation into the activities and associations of the persons participating at the Apalachin meeting. To that end, I took the following steps immediately. Number one, the state police reports on the event were requisitioned. Number two, state police files were examined with respect to all information therein concerning the known participants at the meeting. The district attorney of the 62 counties of the state were requested to forward to me all data in their files concerning any such persons. In other words, a background check. 4, similar requests were made of federal authorities and authorities of the states which all the participants resided. So it's a fucking witch hunt. And number 5, an examination was initiated of the pistol permits extent outside of the city of New York in order to determine whether any of the Apalachin guests held any gun permits. Police Commissioner Kennedy in New York City initiated a similar review of the police permits within the city. Our investigation revealed that pistol permits were held in the following persons known to have participated at the meeting: Dominic D'Agostino, Joe Falcone, Salvatore Falcone, Carlo Gambino, Sam Lagatuda, Sam Monachina, John Montana, Patsy Sciartino, and Emmanuel Zaccari. As a result of the telegraph request by this office to the district attorneys and county judges having authorized those premises, most of these permits were actually revoked. After questioning Sergeant Edgar Croswell, on November 27th of 57, I conferred with the Honorable Judge George Boldman, District Attorney of the County of Tioga and the County of Apalachin, where the meeting was happening. I pointed out to the District Attorney Boldman that only Tioga County grand jury could conduct a full-scale investigation into those circumstances, purposes, and the agenda of said meeting. Mr. Boldman agreed that it was his duty to initiate such an investigation, but stated that he had no assistance and no investigative staff, and that the expense of so wide an investigation, it would actually be prohibitive for Tioga County, which would in effect be carrying out a statewide function in any such investigation. So in other words, I get the fucking money for this. Legal and investigative assistance could be supplied by one of two means. The governor said, the governor could direct the attorney general to appoint a special prosecutor, in which event the expenses of the special prosecutor and the staff would by law be charged to Tioga County. Or the commissioner of investigation could furnish a staff assistance to the district attorney pursuant to the provisions of Section 11 of the executive law, and defray the expenses of the salaries of his staff out to his budget out of the commissioner's office. The second course was obviously fairer to the Tioga County taxpayers. Following further telephone conference and a meeting with the district attorney in Owego, New York, on December 4th of 1957, the district attorney and I formally exchanged letters of agreement, copies of which are set forth in Appendix B, hereto annexed, whereby, with your approval, the assistance and cooperation of my office in a grand jury investigation were extended to the district attorney. On December 9th of 57, members of my staff met with District Attorney Boldman and the Honorable Francis J. Clohessy, County Judge of Tioga County, for the purpose of arranging for the impaneling of a grand jury. But what for? Like, on one page they say, well, just because they may have been past criminals doesn't mean they're criminals, which means they're not doing anything wrong. And now they're trying to file charges. Keep in mind, a lot of these guys got 12 years because of this, but ultimately you'd be thrown out. But still, December 9th of 57, members of my staff met with District Attorney Boldman and Francis, the county judge, for the purpose of arranging the grand jury. The Board of Superiors of Tioga County made available to my staff rent-free adequate spots in the county courthouse for Owego. Equipment was procured and paid for by my office. I assigned First Deputy Commissioner Harold Meyer to direct the operation of the Tioga County office. His permanent staff included, we don't give a fuck about his staff, but we'll move past that. Other members of this staff were assigned for service from time to time as required. January 3rd of 58, a grand jury in and for the county of Tioga was convened. An investigation entitled People of the State of New York versus John Doe et al. To determine whether the crimes of conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and violation of Section 340 of the General Business Law were committed in said county of Tioga County, and that was commenced. So they're filing. It's just, do you understand what I'm getting at with this? It's just all bullshit. And there's no way that all of this stuff could come sort of to the forefront in like 4 months. The grand jury first heard testimony on January 14th of 58 and had been in continuous session since that time. The grand jury's term, which was to expire on April 14th of 58, had been continued up to the court to October 15th of 58. Our investigation, in cooperation with and aid to the aforementioned grand jury inquiry, concerned itself with the following facets of the Apalachin meeting. These were basically their 7 or 8 plot points as to what they were looking for. To determine who was at that meeting and what was the background of anybody at that meeting, to determine the purpose of the meeting at the home of Joe Barbara, to determine the crimes, if any, that were committed at that meeting, to determine the background, associations, and business activities of those attending the meeting and their relationships to other crimes allegedly committed, which may have been the subject of other pending investigations. To correlate all data, records, and information in possession of the state and federal law enforcement agencies and others concerning all of these individuals. To make suggestions and recommendations to the governor concerning possible legislation and action by Governor Harriman to combat organized crime in New York State and to prevent the repetition of such meetings as the Apalachin meeting by individuals who are known to have criminal records and police histories, to indict any of the individuals for substantive crimes committed with the jurisdiction evidence which is so warranted. In addition to the cooperation received from the New York State Police and law enforcement agencies. Outside of this state, the office obtained various records and dates from the following agencies in this state: the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, New York State Troopers, the State Department of Corrections, Division of Identification, State Liquor Authority, Police Department of the City of New York and other municipalities, the county sheriffs of several communities, district attorneys of various counties, and particularly the district attorneys of New York and Broome counties, the subcommittee of the Joint Legislative the subcommittee of the Joint Legislative Committee on Government Operations. What the fuck? Unreal. The United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the U.S. Department of Justice, Alcohol and Tobacco Tax Division, U.S. Treasury Department, Federal Bureau of Narcotics. In the course of the grand jury sessions and through the efforts of the cooperation of this office, 63 witnesses have appeared before this grand jury, were sworn, and either testified or refused to testify on the grounds that any answer which they might give would tend to incriminate them. 20 witnesses were members of the New York State Police, had a part in the roundup of the individuals suspected of being participants at the meeting. 16 witnesses were other than actual participants at the meeting. 27 witnesses who were actual participants of the meeting. Of the 62 or more actual participants at this meeting, to date, 34 have been served with subpoenas. In addition, scores of witnesses were questioned both formally and informally, and hundreds of pages of official records were examined by members of the staff of the Commissioner of Investigation in an effort to discover fruitful avenues of inquiry into the purposes of this meeting. Of the 27 participants who were served with subpoenas, who were already appeared and were sworn in, 20 refused to answer questions on the grounds that the answers might or would tend to incriminate them, thereby asserted their privilege against self-incrimination, in other words, the Fifth Amendment. In order to secure material testimony, despite these refusals, it was decided to offer immunity to just certain participants. A witness who failed to answer proper questions after having been granted immunity could be cited or indicted for contempt, which they did that to a lot of people. In order to avoid tampering and any investigations being conducted by other district attorneys concerning such witnesses, we communicated with those district attorneys concerned and obtained their agreement to our procedures. To date, 4 witnesses have been offered immunity but have refused to testify. As a result, the following proceedings have also been instituted. Frank Zito, what does this say? This witness was detained and released on $500 bail as a material witness. A motion by the district attorney before the county court judge, Francis Kloshesse, to similarly punish Zito for contempt, which, after several hearings, is still pending, has been adjourned to May 20th, 58, upon the application of Zito on the grounds that he is sick. Anthony Peter Riella, indicted for contempt. 17 counts of contempt. I love it. On February, 17 counts of contempt. Go fuck yourself. Contempt. Go fuck yourself. On February 25th of 58, he was released on $1,000 bail pending trial. The trial has been set for May 21st of 58. Roy Carlisi, indicted for contempt 15 times. On February 27th of 58, and arraigned and released on March 7th, 1958, under a $1,000 bail bond. Dominic D'Agostino, indicted for contempt 7 times on April 8th of 58, and arraigned and released on that date with a $1,000 bail bond. As of this date, a number of witnesses are scheduled to appear or reappear before this grand jury. Efforts are being made to locate missing witnesses. Additional indictments must be anticipated should any other witness who is offered immunity refuse to testify. On each of those indictment counts, if the defendant is convicted, and he's liable to a sentence of 1 year per count and a fine of $500 per count. Thus, Riella faces the possibility of 17 fucking years and a fine of $8,500. Carlisi, 15 years and a fine of $7,500. D'Agostino, 7 years and a fine of $3,500. Because they're not going to talk about a meeting, which there was no emphasis for it being a criminal meeting. Like, it's absurd to me. So, according to the investigation information, the meeting was planned in advance. That's what they're saying. Employees of the Armour and Company, Binghamton, New York, testified that a large order of meat products totaling $432.81 was ordered personally by Joe Barber Sr. on November 5th of 1957, with instructions that the meat would be picked up on November 13th of 1957. On the morning of November 13th, 57, Joe Barber Sr., accompanied by Tornabe, was observed at the Binghamton airport. That morning, TWA passengers Gordon, and these are quotes, Gordon and LaRocca arrived in Binghamton at 11:17 from Newark, New Jersey. Scheduled to return on November 14th, they had given the airline the telephone number Apalachin 6-2711 for verification of their reservations. The number is listed to Joe Barbara Sr. At about 3:30 p.m., or excuse me, at 3 p.m., Michael Genovese and John LaRocca of Coin Distribution Company out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, registered at the Arlington Hotel in Binghamton, sharing rooms 852, 854, and 856. Both men's bills were charged to the Barbara Canada Dry account. LaRocca, however, was not among those stopped and identified in the state police roundup. On November 14th of 57, Joe Barbara Sr., 7-passenger Cadillac, and 2 other automobiles appeared at the airport to meet Flight 211 of the Mohawk Airlines, which arrived at 10:59 from Newark. Now, let me ask you something. How the fuck would they even know any of this if it wasn't precipitated by somebody dropping a dime? They wouldn't. They wouldn't be. How can you go back and say that Joe Barbara's fucking Cadillac went to the airport to pick guys up? How would you even fucking know that? You wouldn't unless somebody dropped the fucking dime. Okay? An unusually large number of passengers deplaned at the Binghamton airport on that flight. None of the names on the passenger list of that flight belonged to known Apalachin guests, but 3 passengers had given the airline and the Newark telephone number HU 211539 for verification purposes. The number is listed as one John Lardiano, who has a New Jersey State Police record. 2 others listed a telephone number of one Toto, believed to be New Jersey State Police, to be a waterfront associate. Other participants, Jerry Catania. Though all of these individuals had tickets to return to Newark later on November 14th, none of them actually made the return flight. Since guests like James Coletti of Pueblo, Colorado, and Frank Zito of Springfield, Illinois, who were registered at the Newark Airport Motel, managed by guest Anthony Peter Rayella on November 12th, 13th, and 14th, it must be presumed that Coletti and Zito were among those who arrived at the Binghamton by air the morning of November 14th of 57 and were taken to Apalachin at Barbara's automobile. This presumption is supported by the fact that Coletti and Zito were on foot when stopped and questioned, having apparently no other means of transportation. Others who departed on foot may have arrived by air were Larasso, Lombardazzi, Bonaventure, Joe Bonanno, and Santos Trafficante. But as we know, Joe Bonanno wasn't seen there. They found his ID, but more on that later. Also, Vito Genovese, Jerry Catania, and Joe Ida and Oliveto returned by air after they were released. Simone Scozzari and Frank DiSimano of California, Russell Buffalino of Kingston, Pennsylvania, and Jimmy LaDuca of Niagara Falls stopped in New York City on their way to Apalachin. How the fuck would they even know that? How would they know that? Scozzari and DeSimone stayed at the New Yorker Hotel on November 11th. Buffalino stayed at the Hotel Lexington on November 11th and the 12th. LaDuca was at the Lexington from November 7th till the 11th. On November 13th, LaDuca checked in at the Parkway Motel at Vestal near Apalachin. Also at the Parkway were Carlisi, DeMarco, John Scalish, and Charlie Montagna of Buffalo, Paul Castellano, Carlo Gambino, Tommy Rava, and Mike Miranda stayed at the Wright Hotel in Kirkwood. Natalie Evola of Brooklyn and Jerseyites Louis Larasso and Frank Majuri were at the Carlton Hotel in Binghamton November 13th. Larasso and Majuri did not check out of the Carlton until November 14th. Charles Cheery of Bergen and Joseph Riccobono were known members of the party of 3 who stayed at the Del Hotel in Binghamton on November 13th. Not to be confused with John Montana, Charles was not identified at the roundup. Charles Montana stopped at Utica on his way to Vestal. Vito Genovese, Nick Savello, and Filardo were at the Arlington Hotel. The following table shows the summary and form of how the assembly was consorted. This is some crazy shit. So, Arrival, Alamo, James Ostico, Sciandra, they stayed at Zaccari's residence. Russell Buffalino, DeSimone, Savello, Scazzari, Joe Ida who arrived in Buffalino's car. Buffalino, 11/13/57, paid bill for 5 at the Hotel Casey, Scranton, Pennsylvania. Bonaventure, Joe Bonanno came by car, but they don't know where they stayed. Of all people, they don't know where they stayed. Sam Carlisi, Del Marco, Scalish, Del Duca was driven in the car owned by Scalish. Paul Castellano, Carlo Gambino, Tommy Rava, Mike Miranda was in a car. They stayed at the right motel in Kirkwood, and the car was driven by Paul Castellano. Stefano Magadino in Montana came in Montana's car. Guccia came in a truck. Savello, Filardo came by train and stayed at the Harlington Hotel. Cucciaro, Lombardazzi, Riccobono, and Avola stayed at the Del Motel between 11/13/57 and 11/13/57. Salvatore Chiri, Del Hotel. D'Agostino, Falcone, Lagatudo, Mancuso came by car. Don't know where they stayed. Magliacco, Joe Profaci, by car. Guarnieri, Turigiano came by car. Let's see. Michael Genovese, Vincent Genovese, Manamarino, driven by car by Manamarino, stayed at the Arlington Hotel. Monachino, Salvatore Monachino, Patsy Monachino, and Sciartino came by car. Tommy Riella, car. Ornamento, car. Santos Trafficante, car. Valente, car. Zaccari, Zito, Coletti, Oliveto, by plane. Tornabe, car. LaRosso, car. Majuri, Wilton Hotel. Canone, own car. Rosado, car. The convergence of these men, many are from considerable distances at Apalachin on November 13th and 14th, clearly indicates a planned meeting. Their accommodations were reserved in advance by the Barbaras. Their food was ordered in advance. The fact that several traveled by airplane under false names indicates their purposes were for secret. The 16 months prior to the November 57 convention had witnessed several smaller gatherings of the guests in Binghamton. Profaci, Joe Barbara, and 3 others were registered at the Binghamton Hotel, Arlington, July 9th, 56. Louis Volpe, Frank Garofalo, John Bonaventure, Joe Bonanno, and Joe Barber were registered at the Arlington on October 17th and 18th of 56. This was immediately after this meeting that Garofalo, Carmine Galante, and Unknown were apprehended for speeding on the road back to New York. March 18th of 57, Angelo Sciandra, Russell Buffalino, and 3 other men were signed in at the Arlington Motel. Louis Volpe, John LaRocca, Patsy Sciartino, Sam, Patsy, and Al, and Joseph Monachino were all in Arlington on June 26th of 57. So this is, we'll round it up in a second. Okay, the probable purposes of this meeting. In order to determine the probable purposes of this meeting, the records of official agencies across the country have been combed. The information therein recorded to the known Jesus Christ. Let me turn that off. Sorry, guys. To the known and suspected activities of the Apalachin visitors have been assembled and are set forth in Appendix C. 25 of the Apalachin guests were related by blood or by marriage, and several are related to other noted underworld figures. All right, Joe Barbara Sr. Ignatius Canone is the nephew of Joe Barbara. Natali Evola is the godfather of Ignatius Canone. John Bonaventure, John Bonaventure, his nephew is Joe Bonanno. Joe Savello, Frank DeSimone are actually cousins. Vito Genovese and Michael Joseph Genovese are related. Joe Profaci and Joe Magliacco, cousin and brother-in-law. Joe Rosado, Carlo Gambino, Paul Castellano, brother-in-law of Carlo Gambino. Joe Falcone and Salvatore Falcone, brothers. Sam Monachino and Patsy Monachino, brothers. Frank Valente, Contents Valente are brothers. John Montaigne, Stephen Magadino, Anthony Magadino, and James LaDuca are all brothers. The relationship of Vito and Michael Genovese is established, but the precise degree is unknown. Profaci and Magliacco are second cousins. Profaci's daughter, Carmela, married to Anthony Tocco, son of William Tocco, Detroit gangster, at the shrine of St. Bernadette Church in Brooklyn on June 4th of 55. A luncheon was held that afternoon for 100 guests, and a reception was held at 8 p.m. at the Hotel Commodore in Manhattan. Among the guests attending this luncheon or reception or both were the following underworld figures: Frank Lavorsi, Tommy Dio, Johnny Dio, John Otto, Anthony Bonacera, Anthony Anastasia, Albert Anastasia, Salvatore Musacchio, Alex DeBrisi, Vito Genovese, Mike Miranda, John Ormento, John Bonanno, Joe Barbara, Russell Buffalino, Charlie Cheery, Carlo Gambino, Frank Garofalo, Joe Ida, Tommy Lucchese, Joe Magliacco, Thomas Rava, Santos Traficante, Anthony Riella, Salvatore Tonabe. These men all attended the meeting on November 14th of 57. Another daughter of Profaci is married to the son of George Zerilli, another Detroit gangster. A sister of Tommy Lucchese is married to Joe Rosado. A daughter of Lucchese is married to Tommy Gambino, son of Carlo Gambino. Carlo Gambino is the brother-in-law of Paul Castellano. John Montaigne's nephew Charlie is married to the daughter of Stefano Magadino. Another daughter of Stefano Magadino is married to James LaDuca. About half of the Apalachin participants are native-born Americans. The remainder, 33, were born in Italy. Of these, the majority of are natives of Sicily. So that's where I'm going to stop with that today. This just gets more interesting. Like, there is so much information that they somehow acquired. But like I said, to read these files and really look, hold on, really, maybe I'll do one more page. Let me see. Oh no, we're gonna start next week with all the arrests. 18 arrests, 1 conviction for homicide, 8 arrests, 7 convictions, narcotics. I mean, this gets insane, the amount of information that they were able to acquire. So I'm going to pose this question to you before we cut out for the week. How is it that 2 bumbling pricks, state troopers, end up at a hotel over an argument over a bill which is taken care of? How does that lead them to going to Joe Barbara's place of business and then to his house? How does that lead to them calling for roadblocks and them calling for all available units to come? Because as we stated in the very beginning, the judge overseeing cases, there's no criminality here. And even if they're known to be or known to have had criminal associations, them meeting with anybody does not make them a criminal. They have to be engaged in current criminal acts or discussing criminal acts at this meeting, which we know that there wasn't because we don't know anything about the meeting. I find it hard to believe that 2 bumbling cops just stumbled onto this. I find it odd that Joe Bonanno's driver's license is found at the scene, but somehow he's not. And everybody and their fucking mother got pulled over. How is Joe Bonanno the one guy of all the guys that somehow escapes? Because you have people that said he was never fucking there. And then you have the question of, well, what the fuck was his driver's license doing there? And these are all things that we're going to discuss heading forward. So I hope you got something cool out of this, because this is a very interesting report. All right, so we're going to get out of here for this week. We'll be back next week with an all-new show. Get into the Kennedys. We'll do the Apalachin paperwork part 2. And if tonight you got nothing going on, join us at 9:15 live on YouTube. We're going to discuss sort of the Al Capone thing, Scott Bernstein, and some other facets of organized crime. So join us if you shall. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We're going to get into the Apalachin thing. And here's the weird thing. I was going to I was going to cover like 35 pages of this stuff, but the Kennedy thing is kind of big today, and I don't want to go on for 4 hours. So I'm going to get up to the point where what's going to happen next week is they literally had a dossier on every single motherfucker that went to this meeting. Like, they had shit on guys you would not believe. Paul Castellano, Carlo Gambino, the list just goes on. And rather than get 5 pages into that list and stop, I would rather just hold the list till next week. But we're going to start with Appendix D today, which is a composite of the police records of the Apalachin participants, showing 153 known arrests, 74 known convictions, including 18 arrests and 1 conviction for murder, 8 arrests and 7 convictions for narcotics violations, 17 arrests, 15 convictions for gambling violations, 35 arrests and 22 convictions for illicit alcohol. Now, the question is, how did they get all of this information? I mean, my God. And then you have to ask yourself, if they knew all this, why didn't they just indict guys before all of this? So it's just a little weird to me, but anyway. Investigation is stated, thus disclosed to the following participants in the meeting have a record of associations with professional gambling, including lottery, numbers rackets, or bookmaking. Ignatius Canone, 1 gambling arrest, 1 gambling conviction. Jerry Catania, 2 gambling arrests, 2 gambling convictions. Frank Cucciara, 2 gambling arrests, 2 gambling convictions. Anthony Guarnieri, 1 gambling arrest, no disposition, meaning they don't know how it ended up. Carmine Lombardazzi, 6 gambling arrests, 6 convictions. Frank Majuri, 1 arrest for gambling, 1 conviction. Gabriel Manarino, 2 arrests for gambling, 2 convictions. Armand Rava, 1 arrest for gambling, 1 conviction. Louis Santos, they have a star by his name, which I think is weird, which it says up until including 1955. Okay, Gabriel Manamarino was the owner of the San Souci Hotel in Havana, Cuba. The alleged present owner of that hotel is Louis Santos, another participant at the Apalachin meeting. Santos came here from Havana, Cuba to attend that meeting. Louis Santos is presently being sought out by the District Attorney of New York County for questioning in the connection with the Albert Anastasia murder. Simone Scosari, 2 gambling arrests. They don't know about any convictions. All right, so we move on to the next page, and it says disclosed that the following participants have a history of association with with illicit activity in narcotics. Joe Savello, 1 arrest for narcotics, 1 conviction. Frank Cucciara, 2 narcotics arrests, only 1 conviction. Dominic D'Agostino, 1 narcotic arrest and 1 narcotics conviction, but that was reversed on appeal. John Ormento, 4 narcotics arrests, 4 convictions. James Coletti, Joe Bonanno, and they have a star next to Bonanno, and it says, Bonanno is believed by federal authorities to have an extensive narcotic interests and to be associated with Jimmy Coletti of Pueblo, Colorado, in maintaining the distribution point for narcotics in the United States throughout Coletti's Colorado Cheese Company. Ooh, have we ever talked about the cheese companies before? There you go. Bonanno was at the time arrested with others and charged with transporting machine guns to members of the Capone gang in Chicago. Okay. So let's see. Vito Genovese, major violator list number 130, Narcotics Bureau, U.S. Treasury Department. Mike Miranda, major violator list number 229, Narcotics Bureau, Treasury Department. Vincent Rao, record of contacts with John Ormento and implicates Rao, which they're just saying one leads to the other. Investigation has disclosed that the following Apalachin participants have a history of activity in the illicit manufacture, distribution of sale, or alcohol. Dominic, Joe Barbara, 1 alcohol arrest, 1 alcohol conviction. Roy Carlisi, 1 alcohol arrest, but his case was dismissed. Joe Civello, 1 arrest, 1 conviction. Frank Cucciara, 3 arrests, 1 conviction. Joe Falcone, 1 arrest, it was dismissed. Salvatore Falcone, 1 arrest, dismissed. Carlo Gambino, 7 alcohol arrests. 3 of those were convictions. Bartolo Guccia, 1 arrest, no disposition. Joe Magliacco, 2 arrests, 1 conviction. Frank Maggiore, 3 arrests, 3 convictions. Anthony Ostico, 1 arrest, 1 conviction. Gabriel Manamarino, 1 arrest, no conviction. Patsy Turrigiano, 2 arrests, 1 conviction. Frank Valente, 6 arrests, 4 convictions. Frank Zito, 1 arrest, 1 conviction. Investigation has disclosed that the following participants in the meeting are or have been engaged in labor union activities. Dominic Alemo, let's see, this is Commitment Local 8005, United Mine Workers, Pittston, Pennsylvania. Carlo Gambino, labor consultant Shriller, Gambino, and Salstein on 141st East 44th Street, New York. Louis Larasso, trustee Local 394, International, Hod Carriers? I don't even know what the fuck that is. Building and Common Laborers Union, Elizabeth, New Jersey. Larasso resigned December 15th of 57 after the Apalachin incident. James LaDuca, Secretary Treasurer, Hotel and Restaurant Workers Union, Buffalo, New York. LaDuca was reassigned after the Apalachin incident at the request of the members of that union. Frank Maggiore, Vice President, Local 394, Morris Avenue, Elizabeth, New Jersey, International Hod Carriers Building and Common Laborers Union, returned to prison as a parole violator as a result of his attendance at Apalachin, which is bullshit because there were no crimes. Ridiculous. Okay. The analysis shows that according to police records, the Apalachin delegates had the following common interests: in gambling, 10, in narcotics, 9, in illicit alcohol, 16, and union racketeering, 5. Other information indicates that many of the group have had similar interests, so they're just looking for connections which aren't fucking illegal. For instance, on June 17th of 57, Frank Scalish of 211 Kirby Street, City Island, New York, telephone City Island 8-1856, was shot and killed by 2 unknown men in front of 2380 Arthur Avenue, the Bronx, New York. Scalish was associated with Lucky Luciano and was active in narcotic circles. Furthermore, he was reputed to be an important member of the Mafia for the Bronx and the New York area. His death is believed by the police to have been occasioned by a struggle within the Mafia for control of the importation of narcotics into New York City and distribution therefrom. On January 12th of 1957, while Joseph Giamona of Downey, California, and Frank DeSimone, an attorney also of Downey, occupied rooms 3017-18 and 19 in the New Yorker Hotel, New York City, a call was made from that suite to Scalish's home in City Island. So they're trying to connect that to that. Frank DeSimone and Simone Scozzari, also a California resident, also identified at the Apalachin meeting, have on other occasions occupied the same suite at the New Yorker Hotel, May 8th through the 11th of 56, August 7th through the 10th of 57, and November 11th through the 15th of 57, which they think is a result of the Apalachin meeting. From the fact that Giamona and DeSimone occupied 2 rooms of a 3-room suite, it is reasonable to assume from the aforementioned relationship of DeSimone to Scozzari that the other occupant, though not registered, was Simone Scozzari. Scozzari, when apprehended at the Apalachin meeting, had $10,000 in his pocket, and when asked what his occupation was, he answered unemployed. A significantly large portion of the Apalachin participants are engaged in what appear on the surface to be legitimate activities connected with the garment industry, namely the manufacturing wholesalers, contractors, truckers, and labor consultants and union officials. They are key figures in the non-union garment industry existing in Pittston, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania sweatshops, muscle-protected trucking companies, double-dealing union officials have collaborated to undercut the legislative garment industry of New York City. It is therefore to be inferred that the purpose of this meeting was to discuss problems relating to the illicit activities. Such problems would probably include, you got to love this, division of territories, division of proceeds, payoffs and protection, arrangement and expenses for lobbying, including political contributions, manipulation of labor grievances, and extension of infiltration into the labor unions with particular reference to the strike in Pennsylvania women's apparel industry. It has been speculated in the press that the murder of Albert Anastasia and the attempted assassination of Frank Costello may have been on that agenda. Certainly, the previous activities of certain member of the guests would not rule out that possibility. Assumption. Have you guys at once asked yourself when I'm reading this shit, how do they know all of this? Like, you can't just make this shit up. For instance, in March of 1955, an automobile carrying Ornamento and Salvatore Leprodo of 213 East 107th Street was stopped and searched by New York City police. 2 hours of search revealed a secret compartment located in the upholstery alongside of the driver's seat. The compartment contained 2 automatic pistols with silencers. By turning on 2 electrical appliances on the dashboard and then pressing a button concealed under the upholstery between the driver's legs, the front portion of the right seat sprang forward, and this made the weapons available. In and around the corners of the concealed box, there proves to be a residue of white powder, heroin, although no quantity could be found in the car. A short time after that incident, the brother-in-law of Salvatore Leprodo was involved in an accident in the state of New Jersey, and his wife was actually killed. The force of that car collision drove the front seat forward, and the exact duplicate of the first concealed box was disclosed. Apalachin guest Joe Bonanno, a narcotics suspect and one of the persons who attended the 56 meeting at the Arlington Hotel in Binghamton, visited Italy in October of 57, where he conferred with Santos Sorge and Lucky Luciano. On October 10th of 57, Bonanno was observed at the Excelsior Hotel in Rome, which I've actually been to, believe it or not, and in various nightclubs in that city. During his trip in Rome, he used the alias of DeBella, and his company were 4 unidentified men. On October 13th, Bonanno was observed with these men at the Campani airport. On October 25th of 57, Albert Anastasia was killed at the Park Sheraton Hotel in New York City, and shortly thereafter, Bonanno appeared at the Apalachin meeting in New York. However, here's the thing. They're saying he appeared there, but he was never arrested. All they ever found was his identification. There are other people that said he was not there. So that's what makes a lot of the speculative stuff go a little crazy. Joe Barbara, the host of this meeting, was arrested in 1931 by the Pennsylvania State Police in Wyoming, Pennsylvania, charged with suspicion of murder. Calamero Calogero of Montedoro, Sicily, arrived in Pittston, Pennsylvania on December 31st of 1930. On January 4th of 31, at about 8 p.m., Calogero, while walking along Railroad Street in Pittston, when he was suddenly overtaken by 2 men, one of which who fired 6 shots at him. The victim, in his dying declaration, accused one Tony Moriali of shooting him because of the difficulties between the victim and Sam Volpe and Charles Buffalino. It was established that Barbara was a frequent visitor of the home of Carmel Moriali, brother of Tony. Upon his apprehension, Tony Moriali claimed at the time of the murder that he was working at Old Forge at a still owned by Joe Barbara. Barbara was arrested on suspicion of being a second man. However, he was discharged when a witness refused to identify him. Later in 1931, Joe Barbara was arrested by New York City police and charged with violation of Section 1897 of the Penal Law. basically possessing a gun without a license. Barbara had been stopped at a roadblock in Brooklyn during a hunt for Mad Dog Vincent Cole, a New York gangster who was later murdered. When Barbara was searched, a pistol was found in his possession. The court produced a permit signed by a judge in Broome County, New York. He was then discharged on 8/1/31. On February 10th of 1932, Joe Barbara was taken into custody in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and charged with suspicion of murder. He was not booked on the aforementioned charge, and the arrest does not show up actually on his criminal record. Harry Steinberg, alias Jack Lewis, a New York City parolee in company with Edward Weiss of Scranton, was walking down Money Avenue in Scranton when a car operating in the same direction overtook them. The occupants of the car started shooting, and as a result, Steinberg was killed and Weiss was wounded but later recovered. When taken to the hospital, Weiss identified Joe Barbara and Nick Ross as his shooters. They were both arrested and taken back to the hospital. Confronted by them, Weiss recanted his previous story and stated that they were actually not the men. Barbara and Ross were subsequently released. So for a lot of people that thought that Joe Barbara was a nobody, turns out Joe Barbara was a hardcore serial killer. In 1933, Joe Barbara was arrested in Scranton on suspicion. At 7 p.m. on February 16th of 1933, the body of Samuel Witchner, bootlegger and hijacker, was found in the rear trunk of a car on Meridian Avenue in Scranton, PA. Death was caused by strangulation. There was a noose around the victim's neck, and the rope was fastened to the victim's knees in typical gangland fashion. Two men had been observed leaving the victim's car and entering a black Buick sedan occupied by two other men. The victim had informed his wife that he had been to Barbara's home on a previous night for a conference on bootlegging venture with Joe Barbara, Santos Volpe, and Angelo Polizzi, and had been instructed by Barbara to return tomorrow at 9:30 p.m. the following night, but do not tell anybody where you're going. During that investigation, calls were traced from Joe Barbara's home to Utica 4-0613, listed to Salvatore Falcone Brothers, 550 Bleecker Street, Utica, New York. On the failure of the witness, who had observed two men leaving the victim's car, to identify either Polizzi or Barbara, and they would be discharged. What is this, like 7-8 murders we're up to now? On June 24th of 33 at 10 a.m., the Gotham Shoe Factory in Binghamton, New York, was held up and robbed of a payroll in the sum of $47.75 by two men using a Buick sedan, New York license plate 21452W or 520, excuse me. And it was registered in the name of Jimmy Hart, 1114 Park Place, Brooklyn, New York. The operator's license issued to one James Richmond of 282 Pitkin Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, was found at the scene. This is proved to be fictitious, meaning somebody threw somebody else's ID. The Buick sedan was found abandoned with the motor running at 11 o'clock in the morning, that same date, about 1 mile from the scene of the robbery. 1 hour prior to the robbery, a Chrysler sedan bearing Pennsylvania license plate 69212 was seen in the vicinity where the Buick was later found. Only the operator was in the Chrysler sedan. At 11 o'clock in the morning, this automobile again was in the same vicinity and was alleged to have picked up two men. At 2 p.m., the same automobile was alleged to have picked up two other men in the vicinity, making a total of 5. The Chrysler was checked out to be registered to the name of Joe Barbara, 1717 South Main Street, Old Forge, Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania. On the date of the holdup, Joe Barbara was married to Josephine Vivona of 4 Garfield Avenue, Endicott, New York, with many known New York gangsters at that wedding. On July 9th of 1934, Barbara was questioned in Broome County authorities in connection with the murder of Joe Moriali on July 4th of 34. On June 13th of 1946, Joe Barbara was arrested by the U.S. Marshal in violation of the OPA, illegal acquisition of sugar. On June 27th of 46, he was found guilty and fined $5,000 in the United States District Court in Utica, New York. It has been speculated also in the press that the gathering was a meeting of the so-called Mafia. Of at least some of the participants are identified in various law enforcement agency files and its leading members. The Mafia's traditional penalty of death to informants has thus far effectively prevented the penetration of the veil of secrecy which surrounds this reputed cabal. Prick. Its membership and organization have been the subject of many books and reports based almost entirely upon information short of legal evidence, which permits legal inference or speculation, but which upon no official finding can be properly made. So in other words, we have no idea. It's just rumors and gossip. Although there is obvious support for this theory of what has been disclosed, a contribution by this report to the mass of speculation without competent evidence would serve no useful purpose. So what the fuck is the point? So they have the state of investigation, the criminal prosecution of Apalachin participants. And this is just kind of the sort of the legal form. Although a parade of witnesses have appeared before the grand juries, both within and without the state of New York, and before a legislative committee, all of these investigative bodies have reported that no material evidence was given by any of the delegates relative to the true purposes of this meeting. To date, no effort has been made by these agencies to contradict the invocation of the privilege made before their bodies. Only in the instant investigation were any criminal prosecutions initiated as a result of the November 14th meeting. The threat of prison term is the only possible means available to the grand jury to secure the evidence vital to the successful conclusion of this investigation. However, should the threat of prison not prove sufficient to, I have no idea, I can't, the unsell of the lips of the, oh my God, reluctant witnesses, at least the ends of justice will be served, and that the witnesses who continue to defy the grand jury will suffer the law's penalty. Should these witnesses, or any one of them, ultimately bow to the law and testify either before the trial or their cases thereafter, a grand jury then will have before it for the first time facts necessary for it to determine what crime, if any crimes, if any, were planned or committed at the Upstate New York meeting on November 14th of 57, and whether or not there is sufficient evidence to indict. Let me see. Do I even want to? Let me look at this really quick. Okay, I'm not going to read the legal pressing. So also with this, they have something very interesting. They have a whole list of fucking names. And I'm going to, I think it's, let me just look really quick. All right, it's two more pages of names. But what they do is they list names and where they're from, right? These are the men who were there. Then they have names and dossiers, which we're going to get into next week, which is hilarious. Who knew Joe Barber was a homicidal maniac, killing everybody? All right, so this is called Appendix A, Residents of the State of New York at this Apalachin meeting. Joe Bonanno, but they have a star next to him because they don't have proof. Let me just check the index here because, let's see. Okay, yeah, they don't have proof he was there. All right. Rosario Mancuso from Utica, New York. John Bonaventure, Brooklyn. Neil Migliore, Bayside, New York. Ignatius Canone, Endwell, New York. Mike Miranda, Forest Hills, New York. Patsy Monachino, Auburn, New York. Roy Carlisi, Buffalo, New York. Paul Castellano, Brooklyn, New York. Sam Monachino, Auburn, New York. John Montana, Buffalo, New York. Dominic D'Agostino, Niagara Falls. Natalie Evola, Brooklyn, New York. John Ormento, Lido Beach, New York. Joe Profaci, Brooklyn, New York. Joe Falcone, Utica, New York. Salvatore Falcone, Utica. Vincent Rao, Yonkers, New York. Armand Rava, Brooklyn, New York. Carlo Gambino, Brooklyn, New York. Tony Guarnieri, Johnson City, New York. Joe Riccobono, Staten Island, New York. Bartolo Guccia, Endicott, New York. Joe Rosado, Jackson Heights. James LaDuca, Lewiston, New York. Patsy Sciortino, Auburn, New York. Sam Lagatuda, Buffalo, New York. Salvatore Tornabe, New York, New York. Patsy Turrigiano, Endicott. Carmine Lombardazzi, Brooklyn, New York. Antonio Magadino, Niagara Falls. Peter Valente, Rochester, New York. Joe Valente, Rochester, New York. Joe Magliacco, East Islip, New York. Emmanuel Zakari, Endicott, New York. Okay. And this is residents that were at the meeting that were not from the state of New York. Dominic, oh my God. Hold on, let me start over on this side. Anthony Larasso, Linden, New Jersey. Frank Majuri, Elizabeth, New Jersey. Russell Buffalino, Kingston, Pennsylvania. Dominic Alimo, Pittston. Jerry Catania, Orange, New Jersey. Gabriel Manamarino, New Kensington, Pennsylvania. Dominic Oliveto, Camden, New Jersey. Salvatore Chiri, Bergen, New Jersey. Joe Savello, Dallas, Texas. James Ostico, Pittston, Pennsylvania. Anthony Riala, West Orange, New Jersey. James Coletti, Pueblo, Colorado. Frank Cucciara, Boston, Massachusetts. Louis Santos, Havana, Cuba. John DeMarco, Shaker Heights, Ohio. John Scalish, Cleveland, Ohio. Frank DeSimone, Los Angeles, California. Joe Sciandra, Pittston, PA. Michael Genovese, Gibsonia, Pennsylvania, which is near Pittsburgh. Simone Scozzari, San Gabriel, California. Vito Genovese, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey. Frank Zito, Springfield, Illinois. Joe Ida, Highland Park, New Jersey. Joe Filardo, Kansas City, Missouri. Nick Savello, Kansas City, New Jersey. Let's see. Let me look at the postscript to this. Okay, on November 15th of 57 at 8 p.m., Neil Magliore, while driving his automobile license plate 617318 New York, is in Binghamton. He actually collides with an automobile operated by Thomas Polenick of Binghamton. There were several in the Migliore car. Migliore offered Mr. Polenick immediate payment of damages in order to prevent report to the cops. Migliore has been... Oh, God. Oh, here we go. Migliore has been missing from his home since the Apalachin meeting. From information received from a confidential informant, it is believed that Migliore came to Binghamton to drive other participants to the Apalachin meeting to New York City. It is not believed that he attended the meeting, but is missing. Somebody got 6 behind the head. All right, so I know that was like a lot of information. Hold on, let me just set this aside really quick. I know that was a lot of information, but next week we come back. This is going to get better. And I'll just give you sort of an appendix of what we're going to do. What they basically have is everybody who is at this meeting, right? And welcome back to Mob.